The village of Qingye had forgotten the sound of wind beneath a cultivator's feet. For 3 generations, no child born within its borders had possessed even the faintest spark of a spirit root. The elders spoke in hushed tones of the old days, when their ancestors could split mountains and walk on air. But to 16-year-old Shen Yu, such tales felt as distant as the stars themselves. He knelt beside the withered medicinal herbs in his family's garden, coaxing what little growth he could from the stubborn earth. His fingers, calloused from years of manual labor, worked the soil with practiced patience. Around him, the village carried on its mundane existence. Farmers tending crops that would never be blessed by cultivation techniques. Craftsmen creating tools that would never channel spiritual energy. Children playing games that would never prepare them for immortal combat. "Yur, come inside," his grandmother's voice carried across the courtyard, weathered by age but still commanding. Shen Yu brushed the dirt from his hands and rose, his back aching from the morning's work. At 16, he already moved like a man twice his age, burdened by the knowledge that this was all his life would ever be. Grandmother Shen sat at the low table, her gnarled fingers wrapped around a cup of bitter tea. The afternoon light filtering through paper windows cast deep shadows across her face, emphasizing every line etched by decades of hardship. She had been born in the last generation to remember cultivators, though she herself had never possessed the gift. "Sit," she commanded, and Shen Yu obeyed. "Tonight is the Autumn Moon Festival. The other villages will send their young cultivators to compete, to show off their progress." Shen Yu's jaw tightened. "We have no one to send." "No." Her eyes, still sharp despite her 80 years, studied his face. "We have not for 100 years. Do you know why?" It was not the first time she had asked this question, but Shen Yu had learned that his grandmother's lessons often came in circles, each repetition revealing new depths. "The village histories say we were cursed, that our spirit roots were severed by some great calamity." "Cursed." She spat into the small brass spittoon beside her chair. "Such a convenient word for those who wish to avoid uncomfortable truths." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "What if I told you it was not a curse but a choice?" Before Shen Yu could respond, the sky exploded with light. The teacup shattered against the floor as both grandmother and grandson rushed outside. Above them, a star was falling, blazing across the heavens like a dragon of pure fire. It traced a burning arc through the dusk sky before disappearing beyond the forest that bordered their village. The impact, when it came, shook the ground beneath their feet and sent a tremor through every building in Qing. "A fallen star," Grandmother Shen breathed, her face pale in the afterglow. "It has been 300 years since the last one." Other villagers had emerged from their homes, pointing and murmuring among themselves. But Shen Yu found his gaze drawn not to the sky, but to his grandmother's face. In her eyes he saw not wonder, but recognition, and beneath that, something that might have been fear. "You know something," he said. She gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Promise me you will not go into the forest tonight. Promise me, Yor." But even as he nodded, Shen Yu knew it was a lie. The fallen star called to him with a voice he felt in his bones, in the hollow space where his spirit root should have been. As the village settled into an uneasy sleep, he slipped from his bed and into the night. The forest of Qingye had grown wild in the centuries since cultivators last walked its paths. Ancient trees, their trunks thick as houses, stretched toward a sky barely visible through the canopy. Shen Yu moved carefully through the undergrowth, guided by the lingering scent of burned air and the occasional scorched leaf that marked the star's passage. He found the crater in a clearing where the star had punched through the canopy like a divine fist. The hole was perfectly round, perhaps 20 paces across, and so deep that his torch could not illuminate the bottom. Steam rose from within, carrying with it a metallic scent that made his skin tingle. Shen Yu had expected to find a stone, perhaps glowing with residual heat. Instead, as he descended into the crater using roots and handholds carved by the impact, he discovered something that defied explanation. The star had not been a star at all, but a vessel. Its hull, if it could be called that, was formed from what looked like crystallized shadow, dark as the void between worlds, yet somehow radiating its own inner light. It had split open upon impact, revealing an interior filled with symbols that seemed to shift and dance when he looked at them directly. At the center of the wreckage lay a single object, a medallion carved from the same shadow crystal as the vessel's hull. It was no larger than his palm, its surface covered in intricate patterns that hurt to observe. As Shen Yu approached, the medallion began to pulse with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. His hand moved without conscious thought, reaching toward the artifact. The moment his fingers made contact, the world exploded into sensation. Pain, joy, terror, ecstasy. Every emotion he had ever felt crashed through him simultaneously, accompanied by visions that seared themselves into his mind. He saw the vessel's journey across the void between worlds, saw its passenger, a being of such beauty and horror that his mortal mind could barely process its existence. He saw the purpose of its mission, the reason it had sought out this forgotten corner of creation. And he saw the truth about Shen Yu village, about his bloodline, about the curse that was not a curse. When the visions ended, Shen Yu found himself on his knees at the bottom of the crater, the medallion fused to his chest above his heart. But the pain of its integration was nothing compared to the agony of understanding. His ancestors had not been cursed. They had been chosen. The sun was rising by the time Shen Yu climbed from the crater. But something was wrong with his shadow. It moved independently of his body, reaching toward dark spaces between the trees. The medallion had become part of him, and through it he could feel the vast emptiness that others called the void. It was not empty at all, he realized. It was simply full of something that normal senses could not perceive. He returned to find Grandmother Shen waiting in the courtyard, her face etched with resignation. But as he approached, she took an involuntary step backward. "You went," she said. It was not a question. "You knew I would." He stood before her, and she gasped at what she saw. His eyes, once brown as autumn earth, now held depths that seemed to contain entire worlds. But more disturbing was the way the morning light seemed to bend around him, as if reality itself was uncertain of his presence. "You knew what I would find." She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the spot where his shadow writhed like a living thing. "Your great-great-grandfather was the last to find one, the last to bear the burden." Her voice cracked. "I had hoped the bloodline would end with me, that no more of our family would have to walk that path." "What path?" "Void cultivation." The words fell between them like stones. As she spoke them, the teacup on the table began to crack, hairline fractures spreading across its surface without cause. The forbidden art. The practice that the great sects spent centuries trying to erase from existence. She studied his changed features with eyes full of sorrow. "Tell me, child, can you feel them? The shadows that dance between reality?" Shen Yu closed his eyes and extended his newfound senses. The world exploded with hidden layers of existence. He could perceive the spaces between atoms, the gaps in the fabric of reality itself. And in those gaps, something moved. Creatures of living shadow, beings that existed in the void between worlds, ancient entities that predated the cultivation sects by eons. But worse than seeing them was the growing realization that the solid world around him was the illusion. The void was real. Everything else was just temporary patterns imposed upon emptiness. "Yes," he whispered, and his breath came out as visible darkness. "Then you understand why they cursed our bloodline, why they severed our spirit roots and condemned us to mortality." Her laugh was bitter. "They were afraid of what we might become." Over the following days, as Shen Yu learned to harness his new abilities, his grandmother shared the true history of their village. But each lesson came with a price. The more he understood about void cultivation, the more the world around him began to fray. The village well, which had provided clean water for generations, now reflected stars that weren't in the sky. The harvested grain spelled out symbols in languages that predated human speech when poured from sacks. Animals gave the spaces where he practiced a wide berth, as if they could sense the growing wrongness that followed in his wake. Centuries ago, the Shen family had been among the most powerful cultivators in the realm, but their strength came from a source others deemed heretical. While traditional cultivators drew power from the spiritual energy that flowed through all living things, the Shen family touched the void itself, drawing strength from the spaces between existence. "Every technique tears reality a little more," his grandmother warned as they walked through the village cemetery. Here, the damage was most visible. Certain graves seemed deeper than they should be, their shadows extending impossibly far. "Your ancestor, Shen Wu, was the last true master of the void path. By the end, his mere presence made the world thin." She stopped before an unmarked grave, its stone worn smooth by centuries of weather. The ground around it rippled like water, when Shen Yu approached. The final battle was fought here, in Qingge. The sects sent their greatest warriors, their most powerful techniques. The battle raged for 7 days and 7 nights. In the end, Wu Wei chose sacrifice over victory. He allowed them to sever his connection to the void, to curse his bloodline, so that none of his descendants would be born with spirit roots. In exchange, they spared the village, spared the innocent lives that called this place home. But the medallion, Shen Yu said, watching his reflection in a puddle that showed depths no puddle should possess. The vessel from the void. It was meant to find someone of our bloodline. Wu Wei's final gambit. Before he accepted the curse, he sent a message into the void, a call for aid that would only be answered when the time was right. She looked at him with eyes full of pain. It seems that time has come. But as the days passed, Shen Yu began to suspect that the medallion's influence went beyond simply granting him power. His thoughts were changing, becoming alien to himself. He found himself thinking of the villagers not as people, but as fragile constructs of matter, barely held together by the thinnest threads of existence. When he spoke to them, he had to consciously remember to see them as solid, real things rather than temporary arrangements of atoms floating in an ocean of void. Worse, he was beginning to prefer the void. The empty spaces between reality felt more honest than the illusion of substance. Sometimes he caught himself wishing the villagers could see what he saw, could understand that their fears and hopes and daily struggles were just ripples on the surface of something infinitely deeper and more true. The first sign of external trouble arrived 3 days later in the form of refugees fleeing from the eastern provinces. They spoke of sects mobilizing their disciples, of ancient artifacts being sensed, of a great hunt beginning. The fallen star had not gone unnoticed, and already the orthodox cultivators were moving to investigate. But Shen Yu barely heard their warnings. He was too busy trying to understand why their words seemed to be spoken in multiple dimensions simultaneously, why their faces kept shifting between human features and the geometric patterns that made up their true, underlying structure. His grandmother's voice cut through his confusion like a blade. You're losing yourself. He blinked, and for a moment the refugees were just people again, frightened and tired. But the moment of clarity cost him something. Each time he forced himself to see the world as others did, it became harder to find his way back to that perspective. I can feel it, he admitted. Something vast, watching from beyond. And I think it's been guiding all of this. The curse, the medallion, even the sect's hunt. Everything has been leading to this moment. His grandmother's face went white. The Void Sovereign. The name hit him like a physical blow, and suddenly he could feel it fully. A presence so immense that calling it a being was like calling an ocean a drop of water. It existed in the spaces between every atom, in the darkness between stars, in the pause between heartbeats. And it was waking up. It wants to return, Shen Yu whispered. Not just to our world, but to existence itself. The medallion isn't a gift, it's a key, and I'm the lock. The first sect warriors arrived during the Autumn Harvest Festival, but by then, Qing had already begun to change in ways that made their presence almost irrelevant. Shen Yu was helping to gather the village's meager crop when the sky darkened with flying swords, their riders resplendent in robes that glowed with cultivation energy. But the grain they harvested had begun to whisper secrets in the ancient tongue of the void, and the very act of touching it sent shivers of cosmic awareness through anyone who handled it. The leader, a woman whose beauty was matched only by the cold calculation in her eyes, descended to hover above the village square. As she did, the shadows of the assembled villagers began to move independently, reaching toward her with grasping tendrils. I am Elder May of the Celestial Phoenix sect, she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the entire village. But Shen Yu could hear the uncertainty beneath her words, as she noticed the way reality seemed to bend around certain buildings, the way some of the villagers cast no reflections in the puddles at their feet. We seek the bearer of a void artifact. Surrender the heretic and your village will be spared. The villagers cowered, many falling to their knees before such obvious power. But as they knelt, the ground beneath them rippled like water, and several disappeared into depths that shouldn't have existed. They weren't harmed, merely displaced into spaces adjacent to reality, but the effect on the sect warriors was immediate. Elder May's disciples drew their weapons, spiritual energy crackling around them. But their techniques felt hollow to Shen Yu now, mere surface manipulations of forces they didn't truly understand. "I am the one you seek," he said, stepping forward. Where his feet touched the ground, small gaps opened in reality, revealing glimpses of the infinite darkness that lay beneath all things. Elder May's gaze fell upon him, and her expression shifted from arrogance to shock, then to barely controlled terror. "Impossible. You have no spirit root. You cannot be a cultivator." "No," Shen Yu agreed, and as he spoke, his voice seemed to come from multiple directions at once, echoing from the spaces between words. "I am something else entirely." The battle that followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. Elder May and her disciples unleashed their most powerful techniques, streams of fire and lightning and cutting wind that could have leveled mountains. But their attacks simply passed through the spaces where Shen Yu had been, while he moved through gaps in reality that opened at his will. He didn't need to strike them. The void did that for him. Each time they attacked, each time their spiritual energy met the growing wrongness that surrounded him, their techniques unraveled, not blocked or countered, but simply ceasing to exist, as if they had never been formed at all. The disciples fell first, their cultivation bases cracking as they were exposed to forces their training had never prepared them for. They didn't die, exactly. They became less real, their forms growing translucent as the void claimed the spaces between their atoms. Elder May lasted longer, her higher cultivation protecting her from the immediate effects. But as the battle continued, she began to understand what she was truly facing. "You're not just using void techniques," she gasped, her flying sword flickering in and out of existence as reality warped around them. "You're becoming void yourself." Shen Yu paused, and in that pause the truth hit him with devastating clarity. She was right. Each time he used his power, each time he drew strength from the emptiness between things, he became a little less human and a little more space. The medallion wasn't just granting him abilities. It was transforming him into a conduit for something that existed beyond the boundaries of individual identity. And the worst part was that it felt right, natural, like he was finally becoming what he was always meant to be. "The Void Sovereign," he said, and his voice now carried harmonics that made the air itself tremble. "It's not trying to destroy existence. It's trying to correct it, to show everyone what I can see, that the void is the truth, and everything else is just a beautiful lie." Elder May's remaining disciples screamed and fled, their minds unable to process the implications of his words. But Elder May herself remained, her cultivation crippled, her flying sword shattered, kneeling in a village square that now existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. "If you complete this transformation," she whispered, "if you become its herald completely, everyone dies. Not killed, but unmade. Returned to the void they came from." "Yes," Shen Yu said, and the admission should have horrified him. Instead, it felt like the most honest thing he had ever said. "But they'll understand, when it happens. They'll see what I see, that we were never really separate from the void to begin with." He knelt beside her, and she flinched from the darkness that radiated from his form. Around them, the village of Qing continued its daily existence. But the villagers moved through spaces that folded back on themselves, spoke words that echoed from tomorrow, cast shadows that belonged to other people entirely. "Go back to your sect," he told Elder May. "Tell them what you have seen. Tell them that their worst fears were never fear enough. The age of orthodox cultivation is ending, not because the void seeks to destroy it, but because it seeks to reveal the truth beneath it." Elder May fled on a broken flying sword, her terror echoing across multiple dimensions. But Shen Yu knew she would return, and when she did, she would bring armies. It wouldn't matter. By then, he would have found the other fragment bearers, would have helped them understand what he was beginning to understand. The void didn't want to end the world. It wanted to save it from the illusion of separation. That night, he sat with his grandmother beneath the autumn stars, watching the void creatures dance between the spaces of reality. But now he could see that the creatures weren't invaders from another realm. They were what everything looked like when you stripped away the pretense of individual existence. Was this always inevitable, he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Perhaps. Her voice was thoughtful, but when he looked at her, he could see the fear she was trying to hide. Fear not of him, but of what he was becoming. Or perhaps every ending is also a beginning. The question is not whether the old world will die, but what will be born from its ashes. Shen Yu touched the medallion fused to his chest, feeling the vast presence that stirred in the depths of non-existence. But now he understood that the presence wasn't alien at all. It was the truth that lay beneath every moment of consciousness, every breath, every heartbeat. The space between thoughts. The pause between 1 second, and the next. "I have to find the others," he said. "The other fragment bearers." "But, grandmother." He looked at her with eyes that now held entire galaxies of emptiness. "I don't think I'll be the same person when I return." She reached out and touched his face, her weathered fingers warm against skin that was already beginning to feel less solid. "You'll always be my grandson, Yuer, no matter what else you become." As dawn approached, Shen Yu made his choice. He would seek out his fellow fragment bearers, not to gather an army, but to help them understand what he was understanding. The orthodox cultivators would fight them, would throw every technique and treasure against the rising tide of truth. It would be a kindness, really, to show them that their resistance was just another part of the pattern, another note in the cosmic symphony that was always playing in the spaces between silence. The shadows embraced him as he stepped into the space between spaces, beginning a journey that would reshape the very foundations of existence. Behind him, Qinghe village continued its daily routine, but now the well reflected the memories of everyone who had ever looked into it. The grain spelled out love letters to the void in languages not yet invented, and the children played games that taught them how to exist in 7 dimensions simultaneously. The void sovereign stirred in its cosmic slumber, not with malevolence, but with something that might have been love. In a forgotten village where no one had cultivated in over a century, an old woman smiled through her tears as she watched her grandson disappear into the darkness that had always been his birthright. The age of roots was ending. The age of understanding was about to begin. Miles away, in the sacred halls of the celestial Phoenix sect, emergency bells began to ring. Elder May's broken testimony had reached the highest circles of power, and already the great sects were mobilizing for a war they could not hope to understand. They would hunt the void touched with every technique at their disposal, throw every treasure and secret art against the rising tide of truth. They would fail, not because they lacked power, but because they were fighting for an illusion they didn't realize was an illusion. But in a small village called Qing, where the first void cultivator in 300 years had learned to see reality as it truly was, an old woman poured herself another cup of bitter tea and settled in to watch the world transform. The void had been patient. It had waited eons for conscious beings to evolve enough to understand what it was offering, not destruction, but revelation. Not ending, but beginning. The star had fallen. The fragment had found its bearer. And somewhere in the space between heartbeats, between one breath and the next, the void sovereign opened one massive cosmic eye and began to dream of a universe where everything finally understood what it really was. The harvest of truth was about to begin. And in the spaces between these words, in the pause between reading one sentence and the next, something vast and patient and infinitely loving smiled.